Hello. Ouch. Hello, hello. If you're just hopping on, tell me who you are, where you're from. Hello. Anybody gonna talk tonight? Bernice from Georgia, welcome. Timothy from California, welcome. Thank you for the badge. If you're just hopping on, tell me who you are, where you're from. Hello. Anybody gonna talk to me tonight? If you're just hopping on, tell us who you are. Hello. Let a few more people hop on. I'm late, as usual. Hey, Julie. Did you have a good weekend, Julie? Hello, hello. I'm running late, Julie, as usual. Just a few minutes, though. If you're just hopping on, tell us who you are, where you're from. All right, just gonna wait a minute and then we'll get started. I look like your ex. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Thank you for the badge. I appreciate that. All right, guys. Did you have a good weekend, Julie? I don't see Jen here. Uncanny. Thank you for the badge. I appreciate that. Do you have a name and where you're from? Well, they say everybody has a twin. Apparently mine is your ex. All right. What am I missing? Thank you for the follow. I appreciate that, Jen. Ohio, welcome. Do you have a name? If you're just hopping on, tell us who you are, where you're from. All right, guys, it looks like we're Heath, welcome. Hello, Anthony. Thank you for the badge. All right, guys, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for the likes. I appreciate that. Okay, guys. Well, if you're just hopping on, if you're new here, my name is Renee. I'm from South Dakota. Welcome. I started my TikTok in March of 2024. The reason why I started my TikTok is because in September of 2023, my husband decided to unalive himself. And at that time, that's when I discovered that I had abilities to talk to my spirit guides, and they slowly breadcrumb me to my purpose, which is to be here and to help other people through loss and trauma, and to uplift and give people a place to come if, you know, they're experiencing loss. They just lonely, they need a place to go. That's what my community is about. Whenever I go live, I have a topic. Tonight we're going to talk about, we talk about all kinds of things here. Relationship patterns is what we're going to talk about tonight. If you're just hopping on, tell us who you are, where you're from. Anybody? Julie, are comments not coming through? I'm surprised you didn't say anything. Becca, Michigan, welcome. Thank you for the badge too. I appreciate that. Before we get started, did anybody experience a loss recently that you're struggling with? Open the floor. Anybody? Nobody's going to talk tonight. Minnie, do you want to elaborate on that? Thank you for the follow. Do you have a name and where you're from? Oh, well, thank you, Dale. Where are you from, Dale? If you're just hopping on, tell us who you are, where you're from. My name is Renee. It is a quiet group. I'm from South Dakota. Welcome. Okay, well then I'm just going to get going. So tonight, Julie, we're going to talk about relationship patterns. Hold on. Never mind. Hold that thought. First, my mom passed away. Then my first husband passed away. Then my grandma passed away. And then California. Dale, welcome. We're not doing psychic questions tonight. But if you come back on Wednesday, I can probably answer that question for you. Thank you for the badge, Deal, and then your dad. So, okay, so let me ask you, Becca, so how are you dealing with those? Are they recent, and were they close together? Are you dealing with it, not dealing with it, if you don't mind me asking? If you talk to me, I'm going to ask you questions. You never have to answer. If you're just hopping on, tell us who you are, where you're from. Still there, Becca? Very quiet group tonight. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and do my thing then. Pop in anytime. We're not shy here. Real quick, though, I do have 2 rules here. The first one is I just ask that you always be kind. The second one is we talk absolutely no politics here. It's just not at all what my page is about. There's a million other pages out there for that, so we just don't talk about that here. I always like to say I'm on my journey of life where I am and you're on your journey of life where you are, and none of us are going to agree on everything, so you might hear something on my page that you disagree with. We just agree to disagree, and if you can't do that, all I ask is that you hop off and keep scrolling. So, yeah. Becca, are you still here? Did you want to talk about it? Like I said, we're not shy here, so if you have something to say, pipe in. Until then, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So tonight we're going to talk about relationship patterns, and what does that look like? You're missing them all. I can imagine. What are they recent? If I could talk tonight, or ever. Did they recently pass? And I'm assuming how you said that you're struggling a little bit with at least some of it or part of it or all of it. Thank you for the follow. Do you have a name and where you're from? Thank you for the badge. So relationship patterns, Becca, you can just pipe in anytime. We'll just, whenever. So what does that look like? Reoccurring behaviors, communication styles, emotional responses. So how you basically interact in a relationship, right? So these patterns can be healthy. Sometimes they're not so healthy. So what are relationship patterns? What does that look like? It looks like reoccurring behaviors, right? Sorry, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything in the chat. Bentley, you're fine. Repeating interactions, like always initiating somebody. One person is initiating arguments, or always, maybe the other person's always avoiding conflict, right? I know in my relationship, it was one person was, you know, I was always the one that apologized because one person would basically just shut down. And so it was kind of left to me to kind of fix it, right? Anybody else have any issues like that ever? If you're just hopping on, tell us who you are, where you're from. And so what does that lead to, right? So if one person is withdrawing and the other person is always trying to fix it, it can lead to all kinds of issues in the relationship. One, the person that's always trying to fix it maybe starts, what's the word I'm looking for tonight? Suddenly I can't think of that word. Julie, help me out. Off balance. Right. So it makes and then you start to get resentful too, right? Resentment might come in. And so what would you say how would you fix that, Julie? Help me out here tonight since everybody's so quiet. Thanks for the badge. Right? Maybe there isn't a way to fix it. You know, maybe confronting that partner and saying, look, you know, I don't appreciate when you shut down. How can we fix this? And either one or two things are going to happen. Either that other person's going to want to fix it and say, okay, I'm sorry that I'm doing that, and try to fix it, or, you know, it's just not going to work, right? But bringing the issue up, right? That's always the best policy, which falls into the communication, right? And that's actually going to take us right into the next one, Julie. Thank you. I appreciate that. So communication styles, how people talk to each other. You know, you can be upfront and honest. A lot of people are critical. Some people are defensive, right? So maybe in my case, had I brought it up and said, look, I don't appreciate that you shut down when we're having an issue, and that could make that other person defensive, right? So so at that point, then what happens, right? Sometimes when that person's defensive, you know, they're going to put their defenses up and there's no way to get around it. It's important to be upfront and honest at all times, right? Exactly. Even if you know that it's going to upset that other person, I agree completely. It's always best policy to be upfront and honest. You know, and how can you fix something if you don't, you know, if you don't have communication, you don't talk about it, right? And so in a relationship, that's pretty key, is the communication, and being able to communicate with that other person, you know, whatever it may be, you know, that maybe, you know, when you do this or say this, that hurts my feelings, or I don't know, I'm just throwing stuff out there. You got an example, Julie? If you're just hopping on, tell us who you are, where you're from. You know, but always being upfront and honest is key, right? And then also realizing that if you don't have communication, then basically you don't have a relationship, right? You're in a relationship with yourself. And that kind of brings us into the emotional responses of that, right? The feelings that people express and how they react to their partner's feelings is also a form of a pattern. It's not going to grow. Exactly. And in my case, at the very end, before my husband left, I pointed out to him that when he shut down like that, I felt that was emotional abuse, because sometimes it would be for days and I couldn't stand that. It drove me crazy, right? So, but the only way to fix it is if you talk about it. And hopefully, but finding creative ways, resentment and anger, but finding creative ways. Buddy, thank you for the badge. I appreciate that. And the likes. Finding ways to be able to present that to your partner, where maybe then they don't get defensive and they don't put that wall up, right? That can be key too, right? Being able to, I know one thing, we had a class in school that we learned the I feel statements, right? You know, I feel upset when you do this, or I feel angry when you do this. And sometimes that kind of puts the defenses down a little bit when you use that I feel. Not always, but finding ways and being calm. And I can tell you, my husband had some strokes, and I'm not very proud of my behavior at the very end. I take personal responsibility for that, but hopefully, you know, I can grow from that, and by sharing that, I can help somebody else grow from that. And, you know, I was very defensive at the end, and became to the point where sometimes I was not patient, right? Being able to show our partner patience and maybe some grace. And that's one thing that I regret the most is not being able to step back a few steps sometimes and just show him grace, right? I think we all deserve grace. And we forget to use that tool in our toolbox, the grace tool. So other examples of relationship patterns, if I could talk, like I just talked about, withdrawal. One person is constantly seeking, they withdraw, and the other person is constantly seeking connections, but the other one pulls away. So finding creative ways to deal with that, right? Like I said, talk about it, maybe making some kind of an agreement. Okay, when you're upset with me, how about we just agree that maybe we go our separate ways, and maybe set a time to it and say, okay, we're going to go our separate ways and think about it for like a half an hour, whatever it may be, and then say, okay, we're going to come back and then we're going to discuss it, right? And if they're not willing to do that, then obviously, you have bigger problems. But finding creative ways like that to still give that person their space, maybe. Yeah, not giving up so quickly, but giving that person some space, but also letting them know that you want to talk about it. And like I said, have the space, let everybody cool down, and then, okay, we break, we bring it back together, we discuss it. Let's see. So when one partner is critical, or, our partner frequently attacks us, leading us to constantly be on the defense, right? There again, healthy communication is key in that case. Will you give me a few minutes before I respond? Exactly. Right, Tim? I agree. Exactly. And sometimes we just need that. And that's a personality thing, right? Some people just need that few minutes to, I know I'm a different person than I was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I was a hothead, and I probably would have said something that I shouldn't have said, where now at 50, I've kind of learned, I think I'm glitching. Julie, am I glitching? Sorry, I apologize, guys. I have no control over my internet. But now I can take a step back and go, whoa, maybe I just need to breathe a little bit, think before I talk. I know I'm one of those people now that it's like, okay, I wait 24 hours before I respond sometimes, because I'm not responsible for what comes out of my mouth if I don't stop and think about it. Although that was more the old me. The new me has learned just to kind of take a step back and reevaluate and come at it with a clear head instead of just responding. And that's another thing, is just responding in the heat of the moment isn't always the best policy either, right? Pushing things off never fixes or helps, right? And I can honestly say that happened a lot for me, because it was easier to just kind of put it underneath the rug, versus getting the silent treatment, versus that person withdrawing, right? So, and obviously knowing your partner also, that's key, and that's huge also, is knowing how your partner's going to respond and being able to be calm and, like we said, say, okay, just take a step back. We're both going to take a step back, and then approach it when we're a little calmer or whatever. And then you also have the caregiver, the child, right? Where one partner feels like a parent to the other. Kind of been there, done that one too. Often nagging. So, one person wants control of the whole situation or the whole relationship, right? If you're just hopping on, tell us who you are, where you're from. If you're not familiar, my name is Renee and I'm from South Dakota. Welcome. Breathe, think about it. You cannot take those words back. Exactly. And I know how I was in my 20s, right? I was a hothead, and whatever the first thing came to my mind is what came out of my mouth, and you can't take those things back. So Exactly. Knowing yourself and your partner well enough, but knowing yourself well enough to be able to go, okay, I know I'm like that. I know if I say something, if I respond right now, that it's going to be hurtful or whatever it may be, right? And being able to take that step back and just kind of get a fresh perspective before you respond. And like I said, and also knowing your partner well enough to know how they're going to respond, and kind of, like I said, showing them grace, but also knowing their needs at the same time. So, you know, that's a relationship in a nutshell, right? Is knowing your partner, knowing yourself, and, you know, and communication. And that's really is key to all of it. And we already talked about how, you know, avoiding problems, sweeping them under the rug, right? And so last but not least, understanding your patterns and their patterns helps allow you to make choices to help change those patterns, right? Leading to healthier connection, healthier relationship. And that's really key all the way around. Okay, I've just been going on. Does anybody have anything else they want to add or say to that? Very quiet bunch tonight. I don't know where all the people went that used to comment. Do you have anything else you want to add to that, Julie? And did we lose Becca? She never did respond, did she, Julie? So I really wanted to talk to her. No, nobody's gonna talk. No, I didn't think she responded again, because I would have stopped if I would have seen it. Hi, Mason. Thank you for the follow. I appreciate that. Where are you from? All right, guys. Well, that's pretty much everything I have. Does anybody else, nobody else has anything else they want to add to that conversation, or anything else you need to get off your chest? Michigan, welcome. Glad to have you here. If anybody's got anything they just need to get off their chest or talk about today, anybody? If you're just hopping on, tell us who you are, where you're from. Okay, guys. Well, on that note, I guess what's going to be a short live. I hope you all have a great night. Hey, Lily. I think Lily just hopped on. Thank you for the badge. I appreciate that. And the likes. Hi, how are you, Lily? I was just finishing up. How do you think we should deal with patterns that we carried from our childhood? Working on them yourself. That's huge. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I was actually going to talk about that and forgot. That's huge. So that's a lot of the reason why we have patterns that we've carried over. And I talk about that all the time, is that, you know, when we turn 18, you know, all of that, those patterns or trauma that we brought from our childhood, it doesn't just stop at the door, right? Usually it manifests itself in other ways. So figuring out, okay, sorry, I'm getting a text, guys. Figuring out, okay, where did that pattern come from, right? Going back, figuring out where that pattern came from, and then working through that is really important. And that's what we would call that shadow work, right? Question your thoughts and examine them. And realizing, so like for me, so let's just use an example. So I came from a family where they were hollering at each other all the time, right? So for me, to holler at somebody, not now, but back in my 20s, to holler and to, you know, speak loudly and maybe abusively to somebody maybe would be normal, let's just say, because that's what I saw as a child, right? And being able to step back and identify that pattern and go, maybe that's not so healthy, and then work on it from there. I was not allowed to express my thoughts or feeling as a child. As a child, I'm assuming, Julie? Yeah, I understand. Neither was I. I think that was a Gen X thing, personally, right? Exactly. But recognizing that as an adult and going, okay, I wasn't allowed to express my thoughts and feelings, and working through that and knowing that it is okay to express your thoughts and feelings, but maybe also learning how to do that, you know, because like for me, we weren't allowed to do that either, but learning how to do that in a healthy way, right? Hey Lily, thank you for the likes, I appreciate that. Okay guys, does anybody else have anything? All right, going once. Yes, but that inner child sometimes is fearful. Right. But there again, that's a pattern. So figuring out why is that inner child fearful, and healing that inner child. That's important also. Thank you for the follow. I appreciate that. Is it Brittany? Where are you from? Yes. Right. And so, you know, one of the ways, you know, for me personally, my inner child, it wasn't so much, wasn't the fear there, but for mine, it was, you know, maybe some abandonment or whatever. And that's where, you know, there are certain ways to, like for me, just taking out a picture of myself as a child and just being able to talk to my picture and say, you are safe, right? You are safe. You are worthy, whatever that is that child needs healing. And surprisingly enough, just talking to your childhood photo actually does work. If you've never tried that, it does work. And just telling yourself, you are safe now, you are okay. What are some tools you suggest to use when these active patterns show up and are noticed? I like to recommend a lot of times working through that through journaling. You know, being able to journal and writing letters, like I said, talking to photos, believe it or not, does work. But being able to recognize those, you know, that's the thing, is you have to be able to recognize those patterns, and then in order to work through them. It does, and listen to your inner response also. Right. Exactly. I know for me, like my issues with my parents, I had a counselor suggest to me one time, I wrote a letter to my parents with my left hand, my non-dominant hand. So it was written in the, you know, like from a child. And that was actually very, very helpful. Yes. And also, there you go. Give yourself permission, and give yourself permission to feel that, right? To be able to maybe just sit down and cry and be able to feel those emotions that you weren't allowed to feel before really helps to work through that, right? You have to walk through that storm. And walking through that storms, thank you, Lily, I appreciate that, means dealing with those emotions, right? Whatever those emotions come up from that, you know, and being able to have those emotions, you know, because like Julie said, you know, you said you weren't allowed to have feelings or emotions, and now just being able to maybe journal about that and feel and work through those emotions that you weren't allowed to have when you were a child is quite beneficial. And sometimes you need to get angry about it too. Sometimes it's not just crying about it, you know. Sometimes, you know, maybe you need to go out in the middle of nowhere and just scream or break something, you know. Go buy some cheap dishes at the thrift store and go find some place and just break dishes and talk about how that made you feel that you weren't allowed to have those feelings, you know, whether it be anger or sadness, and just work yourself through that. If you're just hopping on, tell us who you are, where you're from. Thank you for the likes, Lily. I appreciate you. Okay, guys. Well, anybody else have anything? Okay, well then Going once. I gotta plug my phone in too. Going twice. Anybody? All right, guys. Well, on that note, then we're going to go ahead and end this live tonight. Thank you, everybody, for the love and everything. I appreciate you so much. I want to go over really quickly. If you're new here and you don't know, I have a YouTube channel. It's under Scorpio Medium. So if you're not a subscriber and you would like to subscribe, you could go over there and subscribe. That would be great. All the videos you see here, you'll find over there. The only difference is when I go live. And if you miss a live and you'd like to catch that, you can go check it out. I upload those over on Scorpio Medium. I am here Sunday through Wednesday. I try to be as consistent as possible. It doesn't always happen. Life happens. Life is life. But I do try to be here Sunday through Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. Mountain Time. We started a new thing on Wednesday nights. We're doing mini read Wednesdays. So if you have a psychic question or a media or somebody you would like me to pull through as a medium, that is on Wednesday nights at 7:30. Just know, if you come though, usually one question per person, and if you have a psychic question, we're on a short time frame, so usually we ask you have a specific question. Thank you for the follow, I appreciate that. Do you have a name and where you're from? So that's on Wednesday nights. If you would like a full reading with me, there's 2 emails down in my bio. You can check that out, send me an email, we can set that up. And last but not least, I have a Venmo down there below. If you enjoy my content and you would like to leave me a tip, I do have a Venmo down there. Obviously, I never want anybody to donate if they can't, or leave me a tip if they can't. But if you would like to do that and you enjoy my content, that is there available. That's everything I've got. Anybody else have anything to add tonight? Anybody? Okay, well, on that note, I hope you all have a great night. I will be back here Sunday, so I'll be back here tomorrow night at 7:30, and till we meet again.